The universe has a twisted sense of humor. I know this because, on the day my marriage officially unraveled, I was standing in aisle 5 of Jefferson's hardware store, holding a toilet seat. Not just any toilet seat, a deluxe, soft-close, elongated model that Janet had insisted we needed because, and I quote, "I am tired of hearing you slam things in this house." A fair complaint, I suppose. Except I had never, in my life, slammed a toilet seat. But when your wife of 15 years suddenly becomes emotionally invested in bathroom fixtures, you don't argue. You nod, pay for the toilet seat, and pretend that your life is not spiraling into the kind of disaster that makes reality TV producers salivate. So there I was, balancing the box under my arm, debating whether I needed caulk. Spoiler, I didn't, when I heard it. Janet's laugh. Now, let me clarify something. I used to love Janet's laugh. It was one of those full-bodied, head thrown back, make the whole room turn kind of laughs. It was the laugh of someone who genuinely found joy in life. Except I hadn't heard it in years. At least, not in our house. Curious, I peeked around the end of the aisle. And there she was. Janet, my lovely wife, standing near the power tools, positively glowing like a woman in a shampoo commercial. Her hands were animated, her eyes bright, and most unsettling of all, she was touching another man's arm. Not just a casual brush, but a familiar, lingering touch, the kind that says, "I know exactly where all your tattoos are and what you look like when you're asleep." I knew the guy. Charlie Townsend. Charlie was the sort of man who referred to every woman under 40 as darlin', wore sunglasses indoors, and had the general air of someone who had been voted most likely to sell used boats in high school. I was not particularly threatened by Charlie because I had assumed, apparently incorrectly, that Janet's taste in men did not include guys who unironically owned a snakeskin belt. I considered my options. I could march over there, make a scene, and forever be known as the guy who lost it in the hardware store. Or I could do something infinitely more satisfying. I turned, walked straight to the register, and handed the cashier the toilet seat. "Change of plans," I said. "I'm upgrading to the fancy one with the bidet." Did I need a bidet? No. But if my marriage was going to crumble in Jefferson's hardware next to a display of leaf blowers, I was at least walking out with the best dang toilet seat money could buy. By the time I left the store, Janet and Charlie had moved outside. They were standing by his truck, and I, with the grace and subtlety of a man who had just been handed the cosmic punchline of his life, pretended to be deeply engrossed in reading the warranty information on my unnecessary bathroom purchase. Janet leaned against Charlie's door like a teenager in a coming-of-age film. He said something, and she swatted his arm again, the lingering touch. Then, the moment that would be seared into my brain for eternity, she reached up and adjusted his collar. Not in a casual way. Not in a "hey, there's lint on your jacket" way. No, this was the intimate, automatic gesture of a woman who had done it before. Probably many times. The kind of thing you do when you know exactly how a person likes to wear their clothes, when you've spent enough time with them to know the small details. And there it was. The proof. I didn't need texts or suspicious receipts or hushed phone calls in the middle of the night. I had Janet, right there in broad daylight, adjusting Charlie Townsend's collar like he was her husband and I was some stranger holding a toilet seat. I had a choice to make. I could stomp over there and demand an explanation. I could throw the toilet seat at Charlie like some kind of medieval duel challenge. Or I could do what any self-respecting, soon-to-be divorced man would do. I got in my car, turned on the radio, and drove home. Because sometimes, the best move isn't confrontation. It's strategy. And oh, I had a strategy. By the time I got home, I had a plan. Not a good plan, not a smart plan, but a plan nonetheless. See, most men in my situation would probably jump straight to accusations, maybe yell a little, demand answers. Not me. That's what Janet would expect. That's what any rational person would expect. But if there was one thing I prided myself on, it was the ability to be spectacularly unpredictable when the moment called for it. Step 1, I acted normal. I walked into the house, set down my overpriced toilet seat in the hallway like a man who had just completed a noble quest, and casually called out, "Janet, you home?" Silence. That figured. I had just watched her play amateur romance movie lead in the hardware store parking lot, so unless Charlie had developed a sudden passion for home improvement, she was probably still out, fine-tuning whatever fake excuse she planned to feed me later. I took my time. Poured myself a drink, scrolled through my phone, even watched half an episode of some home renovation show where an enthusiastic couple pretended that tearing out a kitchen wall was such a fun weekend project. Eventually, Janet came home. She walked in carrying a bag from some store that sold decorative things I never understood the purpose of. Things like vases that held nothing or tiny wooden signs that said words like gather or bless this mess in curly font. She smiled at me like a woman with a clear conscience. "Hey, babe," she said, setting the bag down. "How was your day?" It took every ounce of willpower not to laugh. "Oh, I said, stretching out on the couch like a man without a single care in the world. Pretty standard. Went to the hardware store." She froze for half a second. Just half. But it was enough. I almost wanted to applaud her. It was a masterclass in self-control. If I hadn't seen what I'd seen, I would have never suspected a thing. But I had seen it. And now we were going to have some fun. So, I continued, pretending to examine my nails. I ran into an old friend while I was out. Her hand stilled on the bag, barely noticeable. "Oh? Yeah. Charlie Townsend." Now, if Janet had any Olympic potential, it was in the sport of casual deflection. Because instead of panic, instead of guilt, she rolled her eyes and let out a small laugh. "Ugh, Charlie. That man is impossible. He was hitting on me again, wasn't he? Beautiful. A master at work." I raised an eyebrow. "Hitting on you?" She sighed, dropping onto the couch beside me, shaking her head like she was exhausted by the mere thought of him. "You know how he is. Always making comments, always trying to flirt." She smiled at me, then reassuring, warm, a picture-perfect wife who had nothing to hide. "Don't tell me you actually took him seriously?" I stared at her for a long moment, fascinated. She was playing this like I was the naive one. Like I had misread the situation and needed her to gently guide me back to reality. I almost wanted to let her keep going just to see how deep she'd dig herself into the hole. But that would be too easy. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "That's funny," I said, keeping my voice light, conversational. "Because when I saw you in the store, it didn't look like he was the only one doing the flirting." She blinked. And there it was, that fraction of a second where the mask slipped. But then she recovered. "What?" she said, laughing again, but this time it was just a little too forced. "Oh my God, Frank, were you spying on me?" I grinned. "Spying? No." Staring in absolute shock? "Yes." She shook her head, still in character. "Okay, wow. You seriously think I was flirting with Charlie?" She crossed her arms, shifting into the offense. "Maybe you're the one who needs to examine some things. You've always been weird about me having male friends." That almost sent me over the edge. Because Janet, my lovely, cheating wife, had precisely one male friend. Charlie. And now I knew why. I leaned back. "You're right. I should work on my trust issues." She nodded, pleased. "And you," I continued, "should work on being better at lying. Because I was standing 10 feet away when you adjusted his collar like you were getting him ready for prom." And there it was. The moment she realized she wasn't getting out of this. Her smile flickered. "Frank, you're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I gestured toward the door. "I'll tell you what, let's call Charlie and ask him what he thinks. Should be a fun conversation." She inhaled sharply, and that was when I knew she had officially run out of excuses. Silence. For the first time all night, she didn't have a clever line, a quick deflection, a manipulative twist to make this my fault. I stood up, stretched. "I'm gonna take a shower." She looked up at me, confused. "That's it?" I smiled. "For now." Then I walked away, already planning my next move. The next morning, Janet acted like nothing happened. That was impressive, considering she had spent most of last night sitting on the couch with the look of someone trying to mentally rewire time itself. I had gone to bed early not because I needed sleep, but because I wanted to let her marinate in the realization that she wasn't as slick as she thought. And now, here she was, standing at the kitchen counter, making coffee like it was just another Tuesday. I leaned against the doorway and watched her. "Morning," she said, without turning around. "Morning," I said back, keeping my voice light. She grabbed a mug, filled it, then finally looked at me. "You want some?" It was a fascinating thing, watching a person pretend everything was fine when they knew it wasn't. I smiled. "You know what? Yeah. I think I'll need the energy today." She nodded, poured a second cup, and handed it to me. Then, she sat at the table, took a sip of her own, and went straight into casual conversation mode. "So, do you need anything from the store today?" I actually laughed. "Just a quick one." It caught her off guard because she blinked like she wasn't sure what was funny. "Oh, Janet," I said, shaking my head. "That's adorable." She stiffened just a little. "What?" "You," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Trying to act like everything is totally normal. Like last night didn't happen. Like I didn't catch you all over Charlie Townsend next to the power drills." She exhaled through her nose, probably deciding whether she wanted to keep pretending or switch tactics. She chose the latter. "Frank, you're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, her voice steady, controlled. "Charlie is just a friend." "You keep saying that, and yet, I've never seen you adjust my collar like that in public," I mused. "You know, for a guy who's just a friend, he seems to get a lot of intimate gestures." She sighed like she was tired of me already. "Okay, you're being childish." "Am I?" I tilted my head. "Because I'm pretty sure it was you flirting next to the Milwaukee drills, not me." "That wasn't flirting," she scoffed. "Charlie's just touchy." I let that sit in the air for a second. Then, I took another slow sip of coffee and gave her a thoughtful nod. "Got it. So when you put your hand on his arm and smiled at him like he just told you he cured a disease, that was just friendly, right?" She rolled her eyes. "You're twisting things." "Oh, I love when people say that," I said, grinning. "It's my favorite line. You're twisting things." I'm over here, just minding my business, describing exactly what happened in front of my own eyes, and suddenly I'm some kind of reality warper. Amazing. Janet stood up, crossing her arms. "Frank, I am not cheating on you." There it was. The official denial. The classic line. The bull-faced declaration that every person in history has said right before the truth steamrolls them into the pavement. I set my mug down and gave her my full attention. "That's funny," I said. "Because I wasn't asking if you were." She hesitated, and for the first time, I saw it, panic. Just a flicker of it, but enough. She was expecting a direct attack. She was expecting me to throw accusations, to yell, to demand answers. Instead, I was just standing there, calm as anything, watching her dig her own grave. I clapped my hands together. "Okay," I said. "You're not cheating." "Great. Now, let's do something fun." She narrowed her eyes. "What?" I grinned. "Let's call Charlie and have him confirm it." Silence. A beautiful, perfect silence. "Go ahead," I said, gesturing toward her phone. "Call him. Put him on speaker. Let's clear this up." She did not move. I nodded. "Aha." I picked up my coffee and took another sip. "You see, that right there is the problem, Janet. If this was really nothing, you'd be dialing already." Her jaw clenched. "I don't have to prove anything to you." "That's true," I agreed. "But you want to, don't you? I mean, you don't want me thinking you're a liar. That would be terrible." She let out a slow breath, pressing her fingers to her temples like I was the exhausting one here. I shrugged. "Tell you what, I'll make it even easier for you. If you don't want to call, let's just go see Charlie together. Right now. She finally snapped. Frank, stop. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Because this is ridiculous, she snapped. You're being insane. I tilted my head. Janet, I think what you meant to say was, Frank, I can't do that because Charlie would absolutely not back me up and this whole thing would fall apart in 5 seconds. She gritted her teeth. You're such a... Careful, I interrupted, pointing at her. If you're about to call me a name, I will get the fancy toilet seat out of the hallway and make a dramatic exit with it. She groaned and dropped back into her chair, rubbing her temples again. I smiled. Hey, while we're at it, tell me, how long has Just a Friend Charlie been a part of your private wardrobe adjustments? No answer. I nodded. Aha. I stood up. All right. Well, I have a busy day ahead. You let me know when you're ready to stop lying. Then I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her stewing in the fact that she had officially lost control of the situation. The thing about Janet is that she's not the kind of person who loses quietly. Some people, when backed into a corner, accept their fate with a sigh and a shrug. Not Janet. No, she's the type that, when she realizes she's losing, will set the entire board on fire just so nobody wins. So I wasn't exactly surprised when, after my little morning performance, she decided to double down. She started with the classic approach, silence. No talking, no eye contact, just a whole lot of dramatic sighing and exaggerated door closing, as if this was some grand punishment for daring to question her noble character. Unfortunately for her, I don't break that easily. So I let her play her little game, watching with mild amusement as she stomped around the house, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. That's when she switched tactics. Are you really going to act like this all day? She finally snapped around noon, standing in the doorway of the living room with her arms crossed. Oh, I'm sorry, I said, looking up from my laptop. Are we talking now? I wasn't sure, since you spent the last 3 hours communicating exclusively through sighs and slamming cabinets. She rolled her eyes. Frank, this is stupid. I agree, I said cheerfully. You should have just told me the truth from the start. Would have saved us both a lot of time. She let out another one of those dramatic sighs. This is exhausting. Tell me about it, I said. Imagine how I feel, being married to someone who thinks gaslighting is a personality trait. That hit a nerve. I am not gaslighting you, she snapped. Really? I leaned back. Because last night, you were adjusting Charlie's collar like his personal stylist, and now you're standing here acting like I hallucinated the whole thing. She clenched her jaw. You're blowing this out of proportion. Right, I nodded. And you, of course, are the victim here. Poor Janet, just out there in the world, innocently fondling Charlie in public, only to come home and be unfairly accused by her awful husband. Tragic. She exhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her temples like she had a migraine. That was my cue to keep going. Hey, here's a fun question, I said. If we ran into someone at the store, and I was the one touching some woman's arm, adjusting her clothes, and laughing like I just heard the funniest joke in history, would you be totally fine with it? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked off to the side. That was the answer. I grinned. Aha. That's what I thought. She turned back to me with a scowl. You're being impossible. Oh no, Janet, I said, putting a hand over my heart. Not impossible. Anything but that. How will I live with myself? She threw her hands up. I don't know why you're doing this. Do you want me to admit to something I didn't do? Is that what this is about? I sighed. Janet, the only thing I want is for you to tell me the truth. But since that clearly isn't happening, I'll settle for watching you squirm. She huffed and stormed off, which I counted as a win. That should have been the end of it. I should have just gone about my day, let her sit with the fact that her usual tricks weren't working. But no, Janet had one more trick up her sleeve. About an hour later, she reappeared, suddenly sweet, suddenly calm, like we hadn't just spent the morning verbally sparring. "I was thinking," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Why don't we go out tonight?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" She smiled, all soft and pleasant, as if nothing had happened. "Let's go out. Just us. Dinner, maybe a movie." I stared at her. "So let me get this straight. This morning, you were sulking around like a teenager caught sneaking out, and now you want a date night?" She shrugged. "I just think we could use some time together. Reconnect." I almost laughed. It was so painfully obvious what she was doing. When logic and arguing failed, Janet's last resort was always distraction. She was banking on the idea that if she could steer me into a romantic evening, I'd magically forget about her little hardware store moment. Tempting. But no. I smiled. "That's sweet, Janet. Really. But I actually have plans tonight." She blinked. "What?" I stood up and stretched. "Yeah, I figured since you get to spend time with friends, I should do the same." Her smile tightened. "Who are you meeting?" "Oh, you wouldn't know them," I said casually. "Just an old friend." That made her eyes narrow, just the slightest bit. She laughed, but it was forced. "I didn't realize you had any old friends you hung out with." I shrugged. "Well, people change. Kind of like how some wives get really friendly with guys named Charlie out of nowhere." She crossed her arms. "So that's what this is? You're trying to make me jealous?" I grinned. "Oh, Janet. Why would I do that? I mean, you said there was nothing going on, right? So that means I can totally go out and have a fun time, just like you do. No big deal." She stared at me, searching for some kind of weakness, some sign that I was bluffing. She didn't find one. Because I wasn't bluffing. I grabbed my keys. "Well, have a great night, sweetheart," I said, giving her a cheerful wave. "Don't wait up." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, finally understanding that I was the one in control now. When I walked back into the house later that night, Janet was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, looking like she had spent the entire evening waiting for the perfect moment to interrogate me. The TV was on, but judging by how fast her foot was tapping against the floor, she hadn't absorbed a single second of whatever show was playing. I barely made it 2 steps inside before she pounced. "So, how was your night?" I smiled. "Fantastic, thanks for asking." She narrowed her eyes. "What did you do?" "Oh, I said, kicking off my shoes. Caught up with an old friend. Had some good conversation, a few laughs. Just a totally normal evening. You wouldn't be interested." Her jaw tightened. "Who was it?" I gave her a thoughtful look, like I was debating whether or not she had earned the right to know. "Why do you ask?" She let out a sharp little breath. "Because you're acting weird." I grinned. "That's funny, you were acting weird yesterday, and when I asked about it, you said I was overreacting." Her eyes flashed. "That is not the same thing." "Oh, you're right," I nodded. "Because I'm not the one sneaking around parking lots, adjusting people's collars like I'm auditioning for a role as a devoted 1950s housewife." Her foot tapped faster. "So what, you're trying to get revenge?" I gasped dramatically. "Janet, revenge? No, no, no. I would never. I'm just out here following your brilliant example. You said friends can be touchy, right? Friends can have special moments in public?" Her lips pressed into a tight line. "You're being ridiculous." "You love saying that," I said, pointing at her. "It's like your go-to when you don't have a real defense." She sat up straighter. "So what, you were out with some woman?" I shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe not. Does it really matter, Janet? I mean, you're not doing anything wrong, right? You told me there's absolutely nothing inappropriate happening in your world, so by your logic, I could have spent the whole night on someone's lap, and it would still be totally fine. Her hands clenched into fists on her lap. You're being petty. Oh, finally. I clapped my hands together. A new word. I was starting to worry that ridiculous was the only one left in your vocabulary. She let out a slow breath through her nose, clearly trying to keep herself from saying something she couldn't take back. Frank, if you're trying to make me jealous, it's not working. I grinned. Yeah? Then why do you look like you're about to explode? She stood up so fast that the couch creaked. Because you're playing stupid games instead of just admitting that you're mad at me. Mad? I placed a hand over my chest. Janet, I'm not mad. I'm just having fun watching you squirm. There's a difference. She scoffed. Oh my God, you're impossible. And you, I said, leaning in slightly, are panicking. Her nostrils flared. I am not panicking. Then call Charlie, I said, stepping back. Right now. Put him on speaker. Let's ask him how he feels about our trusting marriage. She actually flinched. And there it was. The undeniable proof. The reaction of a person who had officially run out of ways to spin the situation. I nodded. That's what I thought. She turned away, grabbing the remote and pretending to be deeply interested in whatever nonsense was on TV. I smiled. Anyway, I'm heading to bed. Maybe tomorrow, you'll be ready to have a real conversation. Or maybe you'll just keep lying and making yourself look worse. Either way, I'm gonna sleep just fine. I left her standing there, stewing in her own mess, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one in control. The next morning, Janet attempted what I can only describe as a half-hearted peace offering. She had clearly spent all night coming up with a strategy, and unfortunately for her, it wasn't a good one. I walked into the kitchen, and there she was, sitting at the table, flipping through a magazine she had no interest in reading, with a forced look of calm on her face. Good morning, she said, without looking up. I poured myself a drink and leaned against the counter. Morning. Silence. She was waiting for me to bring it up. Waiting for me to say something so she could twist it into a way to make me seem unreasonable. When I didn't, she finally broke. So, are we going to talk about this, or are you just going to keep acting like a child? I grinned. I don't know, Janet. I'm feeling pretty good this morning. You, on the other hand, look like you barely slept. That's interesting, isn't it? She shut the magazine and set it down with a sigh. Frank, this isn't normal. I sipped my drink. What isn't normal? This. She gestured vaguely between us. You being passive-aggressive, trying to play mind games. I tilted my head. Janet, do you remember what I asked you to do last night? She rolled her eyes. Yes, Frank, I remember. And did you do it? She looked away. No, because it's ridiculous. I nodded. So just to recap, you were the one out in public, touching another guy like he was your prom date, you were the one who got caught, you were the one who was refused to clear things up with a simple phone call, but somehow, I'm the one acting strange? She exhaled sharply. I am not going to call Charlie just to satisfy your paranoia. I clapped my hands together. Perfect. So now we're officially at the part where you're choosing to let me think you're cheating instead of proving otherwise. Great place to be, Janet. Love that for you. She stood up. Frank, I told you. You told me nothing, I interrupted. You danced around the truth, lied to my face, and now you're hoping that if you ignore the problem long enough, I'll drop it. She folded her arms. What do you want me to say? I grinned. I want you to tell me the truth. But since that's apparently impossible, I'm settling for watching you squirm. She stared at me, waiting for me to blink first. I didn't. Finally, she huffed. You know what? I don't care anymore. Oh, Janet, I said, shaking my head. You care so much. She grabbed her bag off the counter. I'm done talking about this. I nodded. Good idea. You should go spend some time with Charlie. I mean, he's just a friend, right? She stormed out without another word. And that, my friends, was checkmate. I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to argue, beg, or even confront her. I just had to let her show me exactly who she was. And she did. So that was it. I packed a bag. I called a lawyer. And by the time Janet got home, I was already halfway gone. No screaming. No dramatic speeches. Just me, moving on. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and rate the story in the comments.